Hello, everybody. This is Tom DeRose, Executive Director of Creation Studies Institute. Here we are from Florida, where I think today we reached pretty close to 90 degrees. And so we're going to be talking about the Ice Age of all things. And, when I think about this, I can't help but think about creatures that roam the earth. I have to think about the past. And you also have to think about our ministry, because our ministry has started with these trips. Our ministry started in 1988. And in 1991, we started to go down the Peace River. So the inception of the ministry and this trip is very important. What is the Peace River? The Peace River is where we dig up fossils that deal with the Ice Age. There's an area in Florida called Bone Valley. That area is filled with fossils, and it's on Arcadia, Florida. Where is Arcadia? Well, Arcadia is west of
about Space Key.
So it's located on Florida's west coast, north of Fort Myers, and inland about 30 miles or so. So we're excited to share some of the things we found, because we were just there last week. And so the first slide I'm going to show you is some bones that we found in the past and had time to share with others. And if you take a look at the background, you'll see that I'm in the green shirt, talking to actually being filmed by amazing awesome science media that has kind of the same mission we do. The fact is that we like to present God in creation and get people excited about it. And so they do it through video. And so they were having a good time. And I'm holding up some of the Ice Age bones. One big bone with three guys. You see I'm in the middle, the two young men on the flank me. Well, that is a giant mammoth femur, the largest bone in our bodies. In this case, the largest bone of, we believe, one of the largest mammoths that ever roamed the earth. This mammoth could have been 17 foot tall. You have to go where the giraffes are to be able to see it. So just to get an idea of what we're talking about, these creatures were immense. I think of Ice Age creatures being very unique, and I'll go over this in a moment, but they were just amazing creatures that kind of found us down here south when everything got cold up north. And so what I wanted to do as we started to talk about this is rather than show you the creatures first, I wanted to give you a good foundation from the Bible, how this kind of began, because everybody says an ice age. What do you mean by an ice age? So you'll hear this young man come in, or old man, whatever he is, he'll come in and he'll just keep us alive so we know what's going on. We'll make the transitions through him. So was there an ice age? That's the question. Was there an ice age? And so we look at some data. We see that there's evidence that 1/3 of the whole world was covered with ice. 1/3. And how do we know? Well, we know because of evidence. We know that a good part of the earth, when I say 1/3, I mean, you got to look at the snow. You see the snow right here. You can see it. When I said Washington, when I said up north, up New York and so on, they were up 2 miles. Where the Great Lakes are is up to 2 miles of ice up there during the Ice Age. So it was very cold. And so some of you might be curious about this because you live up north, and you might even see some of the things that we're going to be talking about. So the big question is, how do you know there's an Ice Age? Well, we can tell. You know how we can tell? You just look at the boulders. These are boulders that have been displaced. You see these boulders over here? I mean, they're amazing. You can see them right here. Do you see them? They're misplaced. They don't belong there. Here's another set of boulders right here. This one is in New York, Montebello, New York, an Indian rock. All of a sudden, this rock that in New York is misplaced. It doesn't belong there. So how in the world did this rock right here get there? Now the rock underneath it doesn't match. So something happened. Well, we think we know. We think a glacier moved it. So the technical name, I teach earth science, we call it glacial erratic, is a piece of rock that differs from the size and type of rock native to the area in which it rests. These rock boulders are moved by what? By glaciers. There's a hint. glaciers. So glaciers move these rocks. Here's another testimony. Here's a 440 short ton boulder moved by rock. So how do we know we have an ice age? Look for these guys. How about this one? How do you like that? That's a glacial rock. That rock is standing on top of a carbonate structure that's just wasting away. Water, weather, someone is wasting it away, but the rock is still there. Glacial erratic, meaning boulders that have been moved from one place to another by glaciers. Now, there's also another way of looking at things, and that is by looking at groups of rocks that move. And these groups of rocks move down, and when they move down, we know that something happened. What happened? A glacier moved them. Do you see these rocks right here? Do you see how well they're formed right in there? You can see them. You get trained to looking at these areas, and you can say, oh, I see glacial erratic. Oh, I see what they call technically a moraine because the rocks have moved in the front. And so we see it also here. We see glacial erratic right here. I'll point to it right in here so you can see it. If I can find my pointer, where are you? Let's see. Where's that pointer? There it is. Right in here. See right in here? That's been moved. This is North Italy at the Aes Valley. That's rock that doesn't belong there. It's been moved by what? By a glacier. So we see this. Now it's believed that we had 2 miles of glaciers existing at one time. The glaciers were estimated to be as high as 2 miles during the Ice Age. I'm not talking from the bottom, I'm talking above the earth. This is an unbelievable testimony that something happened. What happened? We had lots of snow, lots of ice, all piled up. It meant that the earth had to be cold. Now, when glaciers retreat, they leave their marks behind. And we see this, it's very evident. Now look at this video and you'll see something. You see the rocks coming down, see it coming down, the glacier coming down, it makes a V. When it comes back, it makes a U. Here we go, one more time. Comes down, making a V. Come on, come down, there he goes. Makes a V on the mountain, comes back and makes a U. Now, when you take a look at the lakes around the Grand Lakes area, you'll see that these lakes have been carved, 800-foot Lake Seneca, 800 feet down deep, big lake, almost like an ocean, and was carved by this great big glacier that we believe that was there at one time. So we know that there was an ice age because there were glaciers that moved rocks. I think that's pretty simple to understand. Take a look at this. Here's a glacial stream and a waterfall of Mountain Hall Glacier in Juneau, Alaska. Now you can see the V shape. You see the V shape right there? Look at a beautiful V. You see it? There it is. And that V indicates that the water is coming down. Water's coming down. Glacier's melting. As it melts, it makes that V. It even carves rock. Remember, I showed you it moved rock. And there's ways you can test. Sometimes it moves along the ground and you can see the striations it left behind. So what does the Bible say about all this? Well, the Bible has something to say. In Job, one of the oldest books in the Bible, in Job 37:9-10 says, the tempest comes out from its chamber, the cold from the driving winds. The breath of God produces ice, and the ice-broad waters become frozen. Right then and there, we see that Job, I believe the oldest book in the Bible, is talking about what? It's talking about, hey, there was what? A chamber cold of driving winds, by the breath of God produced ice, and that became frozen. We see another scripture in Genesis 6:16. It says, when darkened by thawing ice and swollen with melting snow. Job, sorry about that. Job 38:32 says, you entered the storehouses of hail, of snow, or seen the storehouses of hail. What are we talking about? Snow, hail. So something was going on, very much like an ice age. In Job 38:28-30, it says, from whom comes the ice? From whom's womb comes the ice? Who gives birth to the frost from the heavens? When the waters become hard as stone, when the surface of the depth is frozen. So we see the scripture is eloquently talking about what? It's talking about something that got very cold at one time. And by the way, Job 38 is when God speaks. In Job 38:29, God says, from whom, just as God, from whose womb comes the ice? Because he's speaking to Job. Remember, The verses before that, brace yourself like a man, chapter 38, beginning of chapter, I will question you, Job, and you shall answer me. So God gives Job 77 questions in this chapter, or these following chapters, chapter 38, 39, 40, 41. He's asking Job question after question, and Job has to give an answer. So one of them is, from whom's womb comes the ice, Job? Do you know where? Well, God knew. Job, of course, did not know, and he had to bow in humility and say, God, with my ears I've heard you, but now with my eyes I've seen you, giving testimony that God was real. God was a relationship. We have a relationship with God. He gives us testimony. He wants a relationship with us. So he gave Job a chance to see him in his fullest capacity with all his powers. And so we see a testimony here of an ice age, the Bible declares. Where does this fit in the Bible? Well, we know that the first, and I'm rounding off, the first 1,500 years were pre-flood. And then man gets, of course, in trouble. God has to pronounce a judgment on him. And so we have 25 years post-flood. Then Jesus Christ comes to redeem the world. And then we have 2,000 years plus. So that's about what we call a biblical timeline. Now, it's approximately 6,000 years. Now, where does the ice age fit? Well, we believe you needed a catastrophe, you follow me, to have really climate change that the world is talking about. Are you listening? We have to have a catastrophe. You see, God created a pretty stable planet, and he created a great environment, the oxygen, the nitrogen, all at specific levels, very precise, so we can live. And so we know that God orchestrated all this, didn't come by chance. So if God orchestrated this, he certainly put a climate together that would not be destroyed by little carbon dioxide. Actually, I believe carbon dioxide is good for the environment. I hope I don't get in trouble with you. But I know that carbon dioxide is good. Scientifically, it's good. So question is, where is the ice age? Where is the ice age? Well, I gave you a hint. It happened right after the flood. So it's believed that right after the flood, for about 700 years, we had the beginnings and the endings of an ice age. So 700 years is where that ice age took place. Now, somebody might say, how did you able to figure that out? Well, you kind of look at the water and how much ice, and you kind of can climb in that kind of configuration. I didn't do the mathematics. Michael Oort did. He gave us the first creation model. And I recommend him as an author, as if you look at some Christian books and you want an idea of what's going on, Michael Oort's a good person to look at. We believe that there was one ice age because the Bible speaks basically of one ice age. Now, I got to tell you something. The evidence I showed you, all those boulders and moraines and all this that was left behind, that was caused by what they say the last ice age. I don't believe in one ice age. But they say the last ice age, evolutionists talk about many ice ages. You ready for this? The last ice age wiped out all the evidence of the other ones. So that means we only have evidence of what? One ice age. Do you follow what I'm saying? Okay. So we believe in one ice age. What happened? There are many theories of how it began. It's much too complicated to figure out. So he comes in, and this guy, he's going to keep telling us what. So I want you to be aware of that. He's here to let us know and keep us going. So what? Okay. So United States, 2018, January. Can you remember? It got cold. 41.5% of the US is now covered with snow. I like to keep that data to let people know that it gets cold here, even still gets cold. I didn't know if you were living in 1977. I was. And you know what happened in Florida? In Florida, where I'm living right now, in South Florida, in the Fort Lauderdale area, it was snowing. It actually snowed in the streets. We went crazy. My little kids, at that time, I had little children and going to school. They canceled school. As soon as the snow hit the ground in South Florida, everybody went crazy. They didn't know what to do. But it actually snowed. It actually, in 1978, 77, 78, they thought we were going through an ice age. A lot of people were talking about an ice age. So we know the weather does move along and goes back and forth. We have these cycles. God made it that way, by the way. It exchanges energies, move energies back and forth. We're going through a period now of hotness. Eventually, I believe it's going to get cold. How do I know? Because it happened in the past. We can check the old ice ages and see the other heating periods too. And there is enough data to show us that we go back and forth in cycles, okay? Now, question is, how did the ice age begin? That's the question. And that's a big mystery. It's a big mystery. I explained that the Bible speaks about it, and I'm going to give you a biblical explanation. There's a world explanation. I'm going to try to give you a couple of ideas about this, but there's over 60 theories as of the early 1970s have been proposed. And today, the number is much higher. Because why? Because really don't know. Now, there's one man that proposed a theory, and it seems to be catching much attention. It's probably being taught in the schools today. And this man is Malkovinovich. Now, Malkovinovich believed that when he looked at his studies, I mean, he was a very intelligent man. He was born in Serbia, where it's really cold. April 11, 2019, he lived in very cold areas, Belgrade, suburbia, where he was born. And then he was a mathematician, astronomer, climatologist, geophysicist, and a civil engineer. This man was a man of all things. He was of all trades. And you're going to see what he did. He did some stunning work as far as putting data together, but I don't believe his predictions. I'll go over that in a second. In the early 1900s, Serbian astrophysicist and theorist had believed that there were variations in the Earth's orbit. He believed that the Earth actually wobbled on its orbit, and he believed that wobble would cause different periods of ice age. So the orbital axle wobble on the Earth can influence the initiation of climate change in long-term natural cycles of ice ages. There's the low, like an ice age, and then warm periods known as glacial, interglacial periods. So he proposed that we're going to get this kind of thing going on. I'm going to just give you a couple ideas without getting, too crazy about it. So one thing he proposed, we saw the wobble. The other thing was that he believed that the Earth orbit was squeezing over a period of time. Now, he extended this time backwards, okay? Now, you have to understand me. He believed in millions of years, okay? And when you go back in time, he believed in uniformitarianism. What is uniformitarianism? It means very, very slow changes over long periods of time. And this is what I find in the evolutionary movement all the time. It's like, close your eyes. We're going to let the magic happen, okay? So this is what they're talking about. All of a sudden, the orbit around the sun, he believes in back, as we went back, started to get squeezed. And he believed it happened every 100,000 to 4 to 5,000 years. He also believed that the Earth actually goes out of its 23.5 degrees turning and actually dips down to 22.1 and goes back to 24.5, meaning that as the Earth moves, it does, as I showed you earlier, it kind of wobbles. And he believes that this wobbling causes what we call ice ages at certain periods of time, maybe 100,000 years each time. So he took all this data, and he did. He really had to accumulate a lot of data over many years, and he made these graphs. Now you look at them, they look pretty complicated. Well, they are complicated, and they're hard to figure out. Why? Because he did a lot of assumptions. He did his calculations. Calculations were very good, but they were made of a lot of assumptions. And so we don't know how bad the Earth wobbles on the Earth. Why? Because we only have, thousands of years to measure it to some degree. Maybe now, the last 100 years, we can really zero in on it. So there are a lot of questions here, when we go back in time. So here's some, as we finish up, I just want to give some conclusion. The theory not supported by scientific data. Why? Because even the dated climate records of the last million years, and we have, especially the last few years do not exactly match the shape of the eccentricity curve he's talking about. In other words, when we hold it true, we're not finding it exactly to be true. And let me tell you, if you go back millions of years, it's got to be true. It's not working out. The other thing, these forces on the Earth can be occurring, but the big problem is what? We go back in time, they assume of long periods of time made by their mathematical predictions and using so they went back in time using mathematical predictions. So has anybody been back 1,000 years? Do we have data that goes back thousands of years? The answer is no. So is this really true? Can that little wobble for that little space of time really in 700 years, like we determined last age to be real, the ice age to be really big? I think as I talk to you today, not many people hold this true. Now there are some that do because of the way it's portrayed, and they have some, there's some agreements. But here's the problem. How do we know? Nobody knows. You follow me. This is data that we accomplished maybe 100 years or so, and we're not exactly sure if this is going to really cause anything. Okay, so there are this is what they propose, ladies and gentlemen. Over 60 glacial advances and retreats have occurred during the last 2 million years. They believe that the ice age are cycled regularly intervals of 100,000 years for the past 800,000 years. The last episode, the last Wisconsin glacial period, was the greatest, all covering 1/3 of the Earth and 97% of the Canada, okay? And it erased the fossil evidence of the previous ones. Did you hear what I just said? It erased the fossil evidence, the rock layers. So what do we have? Well, we just have the wiggles, which we're trying to still figure out. I think we got a problem. Yep, I think we got a real problem. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to speak to you now from an ice age perspective, from a biblical viewpoint. What's the Bible say? Well, let's take a look. We already know that the Bible speaks of a flood. The Bible talks about a model. And what I want to do is, I hope you guys can hear this really good, is Michael Ord. I'm going to play a little video. Johnny, is everybody can hear that? Can they hear that? Let's check this out.
The ice on Greenland and Antarctica is in places miles deep and hundreds of miles wide. In the present, however, all but the edges of these ice sheets are cold deserts. Not enough snow and ice falls there to build up the depth of ice that we find today, even if long periods of time were available. The flood of the Bible may provide an answer. First of all, flood rocks contain thick piles of lava and huge volumes of volcanic ash. Meteorologist Mike Ord has suggested that this might have led to the Ice Age.
There was a lot of warm water added to the pre-flood oceans from the crust, and also a lot of lava flows and volcanism that heat the waters.
Evidence in fossils suggests that the oceans were warmed up in the course of the flood.
The average temperature of the ocean is 39 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, after the flood, it could have been an average of about 86 degrees Fahrenheit. And you could have taken a swim in the Arctic Ocean right after the flood. It was so warm. But then it's going to start cooling down, and that cooling is mainly by evaporation. So the key here is that with that warm water, you evaporate so much more water vapor in the air.
As the oceans cooled after the flood, heavy snow began to fall. Computer simulations that begin with warm oceans show snow falling far inland over cool continents. Ice sheets build up thousands of feet thick, where we see evidence for such ice today. This ice built up in only a few centuries of time. The whole process was sped up by volcanic ash cooling the earth after the flood.
because of the instability of the Earth after the flood, there'd be a lot of volcanism. Aerosols are tiny particles about a micron in diameter, and they'll float up there in the stratosphere for several years, and they reflect sunlight back to space. So you have a cooling mechanism. The ice is going to build up, and then finally it's going to come to a point where it's going to peak. That's glacial maximum.
Once the oceans cooled enough, the evaporation slowed, the snows stopped, and the ice began to melt. Calculations suggest that the buildup, movement, and melting of ice did not require many thousands of years as is traditionally taught. From a warm world at the end of the flood to the melting of the ice took only centuries of time.
And then I see evidence of the one ice age and the short, rapid ice age that melts catastrophically. This is what I see based on science.
Present climate is not the key to understanding what produced thick piles of ice in Greenland and Antarctica. It looks like the Bible had the key all along, the Great Flood in the days of Noah.
The Great Flood in the days of Noah. Interesting. The Bible had the answer all the time, has the answers all the time. So here are some big questions to think about. Question number one. How do you account for, I don't know where that came from, but how do you account for all the locked up glaciers in Greenland and Antarctic, miles deep and 100 miles wide? Why are there cold deserts that surround these glacier areas? Why is there huge amounts of lava or volcanic ash present in sedimentary rocks, which are flood rocks? So we see this. There is evidence of what? There is evidence of 2-3 mile, there's glaciers now miles deep, and they extend hundreds of miles in length. Where did that come from? Huh? Where did that come from? What's the explanation for that? The world can't explain that. That's a lot of ice. Where did it come from? Now, we know there was an ice age. We know there was an ice age because we see the glaciers, we see the effects on the Earth. Okay, why were there cold deserts that surround these glacial areas? Mike talks about the fact that Mike Ort is a meteorologist and did a lot of time in study and research into building this model that most creationists use. Mike just spoke. So he talks about lakes and so on, and like these areas where you have this big area of glaciation, and then the glaciers move, and you wind up with like deserts and lakes all around it because how did that happen? And then, of course, why is there huge amounts of lava and volcanic ash everywhere in midst of these rock layers? How did that get there? So we know as creationists that the fossils come from a worldwide flood. Now I'm talking about, yes, fossils like the fossils that they dig up, like dinosaur fossils. That's what I'm talking about. Fish fossils. They signify a worldwide flood because they got buried quickly. And that's what we see. So we go from there. Okay. Now, there are conditions for this to happen. The first condition for an ice age is you'd have to have lower temperatures on the Earth, which makes sense. It's got to get cold. Then you have to have snow and ice, right? Got to have cold, okay? And then you have to have snow, okay? Produce cooler summers. The summers, for some reason, have to let the wind, they got to come in so the snow doesn't melt right away. The winter has to be a little longer so the snow can build up and so on. And then they have to, what happens is the second condition is that there's somewhere that ocean has to evaporate a lot of water. It has to evaporate a lot of water so the ocean get cool, but somewhere that water goes up into space, into the air, and then rains over in form of snow, and it makes glaciers that we see today, okay? And as we look, the worldwide temperatures have to drop. It's got to get cold, maybe about 10 degrees. And then we look at the ocean's waters begin to what? Drop. And that's what we see evidence all over that even you go to Florida's coast, to the West Coast, we found graveyards hundreds of feet away from the shoreline, that people used to live there. There's lots of evidence that there are people living near the shorelines, but miles away. And you go down deep and you can see some of the artifacts down there. Yes, the city of Atlantis is real. So we know that there's evidence that supports this. So the cause, the Genesis flood. Now, the Bible says that the fountains of the deep burst forth. Genesis 7:11. It tells us clearly. Then it says that the floodgates of heavens opened up. We believe that the volcanoes the whole planet crust became very unstable. And in doing so, volcanoes started to explode, and volcanoes could contain tremendous amounts of energy. So volcanoes they start to explode, great deals of energy. We have like Mount St Helens, 430 million tons of TNT, 33,000 atomic bombs. Now that's kind of a small volcano compared to something like Mount Penatube. There are over 1,500 volcanoes today. Mount Penatube was 10 times that. And there are many other volcanoes that are much larger than Mount St. Helens. There are 1,500 active volcanoes right now, 8 or 12 exploding right now. This is representing an explosion of Mount St. Helens. It exploded from the side of the mountain. And we could see the damage that it caused. So when I say 33,000 atomic bombs going off in 8 hours, that's what I'm talking about. We can measure the amount of force that volcano, we talk about atomic bombs. This is an atomic bomb when these things go off. So much energy, and volcanic dust goes everywhere. This is Mount Penatube I was talking about earlier, 10 times stronger than Mount St. Helens. 1991, take a look at those houses. They're buried by volcanic ash. Look at this lady walking. It's like a volcano. You can't see for days. In this case, in the Philippines, you couldn't see anything for days. 1991. Mount Penatube in 19, an explosion was a stratovolcano. And in other words, when the stratosphere is where it started to really build up. And before you know it, it took 2 to 3 years of getting cooler. So we see that this effect does work. Volcanic ash does cool the earth. So we believe that at this time when Noah's flood took place, there was a lot of activity going on underneath the ocean. Exploding. And what happened? We had this volcanic ash going over us, and the rays of sun couldn't penetrate the earth to warm them up. We see that as the volcanic dust started to accumulate, it started to cool the continents about 10 degrees. We believe that the oceans were hot. Why were the oceans hot? Because there was a lot of volcanic ash, volcanism taking place right in the ocean itself. As a result, the oceans start getting hot. There were 39 degrees average temperature going up to 80 degrees. You could swim in the Antarctic. You can go for a swim in the ocean and it wouldn't be cold, believe me. So you have to understand this. The temperatures were they were being absorbed by the water. And what was happening? The water was getting a lot of energy to produce evaporation. So as the water started to evaporate, we now have the hot oceans, the fountains of the deep exploding. We have now the cold land masses produced by the sun rays. We have the hot oceans and cold land masses. We have wind. What's wind going to do? It's going to move. We're going to have weather. In Florida, we have hurricanes. They're pretty tremendous, but there's a lot of energy going off when you have a hurricane. When we see weather, climatology, the idea of weather, we see it exchanging energy. It's a balance, goes back and forth. We're going through a warmer period because there's a lot of energy in the ocean. Once that dissipates, guess what? It goes back again. It gets cold. So these are long-term effects. So we see the conditions for an ice age. First, you have to have cooler summers. Then you have to have, second condition, heavy snow. The only way this could happen, this is the conditions to have an ice age. The only way this could happen is a worldwide flood. You hear this? That's why I don't believe in global warming that's going to cause the earth, we're going to eventually, not have any food because, all the pollution, all the CO2, that's crazy. Number one, volcanic activity provides the cooling effect. That's what happens. We have the volcanic ash and gases from the flood, which take their 3 years to cool the planet. And then would lower the temperatures about 10 degrees. So that's the cooling end, cool summers, longer summers. The winters don't have to be as cold, but they're longer stretches where the snow can remain on ground. Horrific storms are generated. That's how we found the mammoths. We're going to explain in a moment. We found a herd of mammoths because of a horrific storm during the Ice Age, drowning them. And so you have to understand that during the Ice Age, there weren't like little storms, there were horrific storms coming. Why? Because a lot of evaporation here, energy from the ocean, there was a lot of energy causing a lot of meteorological events, a lot of weather coming in, hurricanes, forces, strong forces, and so on, burying things. Water is supplied by the hot oceans through evaporation of the hot oceans. And then oceans waters begin to fall about 300 to 400 feet. We know this is a fact. The waters drop 300 to 400 feet. And I don't have a lot of time. Got to get into the creature so you can see them. But the 300 to 400 feet will give us enough area. And the Tower of Babel happens right after Noah's flood, chapter 11 in Genesis. Chapter 6 and 9 is Noah's flood. So you understand it's very close. Chapter 11, now we have the people moving about. Why? They can move about. The oceans have sucked it up. The glaciers are north, south. And now we have people migrating back and forth. And everybody's migrating. Why? It's cold up north. They're coming down south. The Antarctic, they're coming to the equator. Everybody's coming. There's a lot of movement. And even the people are moving. Why? Because we have the Tower of Babel. So you get the impression everybody's moving because of an ice age. So where does this put us? It puts us in Florida. Where does everybody come when it gets cold? They head down here, the snowbirds. Now I know why Florida is pretty good. You have snowbird in. Well, we had a lot of animals come down here too. I remember I told you about we were fossil hunting at the Peace River in Acadia, Florida, and I called it said Bone Valley. You got all these animals here. I mean, unbelievable animals. They were unique because, I mean, have you ever seen a big mammoth that needs to go in with the draft area, like giantism? And some of these mammoths look pretty bad. How about a brown sloth that was 18 foot tall? How about an armadillo that stood 5 foot tall? I mean, you had some weird creatures. They're of course extinct today, thank God. And there was giantism everywhere in the fossil record. I mean, you got some ugly looking things there. We don't call them ugly. I don't know. They're God's creatures, so I guess you would call them pretty, but I don't know. It's kind of funny. Take a look at this. You have the cave bear, which I'm going to show you, the ground sloth, which I'm going to show you, the bison just grew a little bit larger. It seems like everything's growing larger, and the hornless rhinoceros, and so on. It goes on and on. So I'm going to start off with the mammoths. What happened to the mammoths? Okay, so we're going to begin here. So we have a lot of mammoths, and I have to show you this picture because you see a woolly mammoth, you see a Columbian mammoth, you see an astral mammoth, and you see a mastodon. Now, those creatures are all elephant kind. You see that? Like you have cat kind, dog kind. Those are all kind. You follow me? They all belong to the elephant kind. Here's the woolly mammoth. Okay, this woolly mammoth stood about maybe 8 feet, like an Asian elephant. Asian elephants are not as tall as the African elephant. You go to the zoo, they're 8 to 9 feet, 10 feet maybe. They're fairly small. And so we know that we have different kinds of elephants, Asian and African. We also have different kinds of mammoths, woolly mammoth. And how about the Columbian mammoth? Now, the Columbian mammoth was something else. He could stand 12 to 17 foot tall. He's a big guy. He comes in that room and you would know he was there, very robust in structure and so on. He migrated down to South America, migrated here in the Peace River, where we found not one, but 4 of them. So here's a mastodon. We found lots of mastodon pieces. He was weighed 6 to 10 feet. I mean, he had a height of 6 to 10 feet, weighed 4 to 6 tons. He wasn't like a grass eater. He ate herbs and shrubs from trees and so on. His teeth were kind of blunt. Now, the Bible says this, then God said, let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants, and trees on land that bear fruit with seed in it according to their various kinds. Now, the Bible is very specific because it says after its kind 10 times. So when I say elephant kind, you got to think that there's a variety of elephants. You follow me? Variety of different animals starting from one animal. you see what creationists believe is right after the flood, as the animals start to move before, they start to breed, and they start to really breed other animals. And so that's why we got these unique kind of creatures walking around. Many of them became extinct. Others are part of them. Now you might say, what are you talking about? I mean, you got to be crazy. You got, all these different horses, big and small. You got mammoths. They have little mammoths. Mammoths the size of little horses they had, and big ones. So yeah, pygmy mammoths all the way up. Well, doesn't that jump too much? Don't get on my case, okay? The elephants, yeah, they had lots of breeds, okay? So did the dogs. You know about that dogs, right? 339, according to one registry, the French registry. There's a lot of them, a lot of breeds of dogs. Dog breeds, genetic variation. What do I mean by genetic variation? There's lots of variation in the dog kind. I don't have to tell you that. You know that, right? How about this? Now, I must tell you, I love this picture so much that I had to take a couple of them. So here's one, Chihuahua and the Great Dane. Now, you got to understand, when you look at the anatomy of both animals, you follow me? There's a big difference, but they're still dogs. That's variation. That's variation in the kind. Now, this one is one of my favorites. It's better than the one before that was going to eat them. Now, they're so cute. So you understand variation. So this is not evolution when I put the next slide up. You see this wolf? Because of mating, because of breeding, that's the way it came to be. That's not evolution. Evolution, they're talking about change and so on through time, where everything changes. I am saying that there is a change in the genetics of that individual. God made it the DNA, so the DNA would have the variability within that kind. It stays that kind. Okay, you don't have to worry about having a baby and worrying if you're going to have a chimpanzee or not. There's no, because we stay in the kind. Okay, so you look at humans, how different we are. So we know about this. We also know about Indians hunting mammoths. And so we this idea of men moving back and forth, you can understand what was happening during this time. Men were coming all over the place. We had these land bridges because the waters were down 300 to 400 feet. The oceans were down. So everybody was migrating. Where? To warmer climates. And so the predators, including men, were eating the mammoths. Now, in 1996, we found the first mammoth. We found a Columbian mammoth. So I'm not here to just talk to you and say, oh, look at these pretty pictures. I'm saying we've actually touched mammoth bones, and we dug them out in the river. We started this in 91. Remember I told you? And years later, God blessed us. This is Greg Reuter. He finds the first part of a mammoth, the tusk. Before you know it, we had a leg. And then we kept digging and we found the mouth. Now, if you take a look at that clearly, you'll see that that's a blessing. Why? Everything is intact. Usually when you find fossils like that, it's all broken up, but everything is intact. That's a miracle. Now, there are people that find that and then don't give God the glory. We did. That's a miracle. That's the way, God preserves history this way. And we know about Columbian mammoths because many of them have been dug up. So here's the atlas over here, right in the side. That's where the head sits. That's the jaw. They were pretty close, right? So we have one mammoth right there with his legs and so on. And there's the femur. And the femur, his head is off. So you can see that's a mammoth. We found the mammoth. We dug deeper into the layers and we found more things. The homeschoolers were able to help us because we got stuck. We got stuck in the weekend. We found that mammoth. We needed help to dig it up. And so they were very fortunate that they were able to stay behind and help us dig the mammoth up. This is the first part that we found. This is a 17-foot age Columbian mammoth. This is the femur that I have in my hands. This is what it came from to understand when we talk about finding fossils. This one was broken up pretty bad. And you can see in this mess here that these parts had to be put together. But over here, the top of this is the ball joint. It was separated. What does that mean? It means that they were not fused. That means that mammoth, that 17-foot mammoth, and we're guesstimating, it could be larger than that, was still growing. So keep that in your mind. So you got giants. This is a giant. I mean, forget about giraffes. This guy's is growing as big as a giraffe now. And so here I am standing in front of, this is a Columbian Mammoth. It's about 16 foot. Ours would be about this big. How do I know? It's about up over here. This is the University of Miami's Florida Museum, the Florida Museum of Natural History. And I'm standing in front of and right over here now, I'm going to move up. I actually went on this is the toe bone. We found a toe bone that's bigger than this. So I think it could be even 2 inches bigger than this guy. Our femur is bigger. So we were so excited when we found all this mammoth stuff from 1996 to 1999. So we were able to put this together in some museum in Florida. So you got to come pay us a visit and we'll show you around. We put a lot of our stuff there. This is the teeth of the mammoths. Now there are different types of dentation. This is the teeth of Columbian mammoth. This is the teeth of a mastodon. So these kinds had kind of different sets of teeth. If that's disturbing? No, it's genetics. Okay, the genetics of these animals could change their teeth. And this is the stumps and so on of the mastodon teeth. Here is the mastodon again with its roots. We've actually found some of those roots. So let's quickly go over the other Ice Age animals. Here is what I believe the Bone Valley could have looked like, where we see in Florida, there's a big peninsula. You know, Florida's a peninsula. There's an outside ridge, Panama City, and then, you know, but as you go down, Tallahassee is here, and then you start going down to Gainesville, and you go all the way down to where we live in Fort Lauderdale. Well, on the west coast of Florida, a little bit, it's not really south. It's kind of central. Where Ocala is a real high, there's a couple 100 feet of highness. In Florida, it's not very high, of course, but in that area, it's about 100 feet, 200 feet up in the air. And it's believed when it comes down, we believe that's where the flood ended, and we find a lot of marine animals in this area. So where is this? This is where Arcadia is in Florida. This is where we're finding all the mammoths. And we believe the savannas, plenty of savannas over here. Everybody believed that. Why? Because there's huge amounts of animals, lots of them. They all came down here. What were they eating? They were eating grass. So you have to associate, if they were all coming down here, we're finding parts of them, they were not eating trees, they were eating grass. So they had to have lots of grass. So we assumed it was grass. That means that had been temperatures that would turn back and forth a little. You would have savannas are caused by fires. You know that when after a period of time, fire comes in and then makes the grass, and that's how it goes. And then you have some outside lying trees where the mastodons could live and so on. This over here is a calyptodon. Now I'm going to go over these creatures in a second. Now these are unique. They're extinct, and they are giants of the land. Here's a giant sloth. This is called, there's two of them called Megatherium and Erytherium. It depends on the claws. I believe if you have 3 claws, it's Erytherium. So this is a big guy, and this is the actual picture that somebody did. This, I think, is one of the best ones. I've seen people with hair and so on. I'm not too sure about this one, but this kind of gives you an idea. You can see over there a deer in the background. It's 18 foot up in the air, okay? You got to imagine a sloth 18 foot up in the air. How do we know this? Hey, we find the fossils. I mean, imagine finding you find one of these things, okay? Find a claw, find ribs, and so on. And we found lots of these parts. I mean, we have a man that works with us who had found lots of these parts up in the river. It's still there in the river. They found a Harlem sloth. Up a little further in Florida, they found a big Megatherium that stood 18 foot tall. Look at his claws. I mean, that's unbelievable. Big claws. All right. So this is his teeth. Now his teeth this would measure, this is at least 3 inches. Okay. So you got 3-inch teeth coming down, and they have rough edges. They look like you ready for this? They look like a rat's tooth. They look like a rodent's tooth. And rodents have to always shave their teeth down. So this 18-foot sloth, you follow me, had to go and shave its teeth down on the branches and so on around. So he was busy. Because if he didn't do that, as you know, if they lack enamel, what do the rodents do? They have to keep working their teeth, else the teeth grow through their skull. important to understand. So they were very active and probably nocturnal when we look at it. And I'm going to have Professor Kevin Seymour talk to you about one, because I like the picture that they're going to show. Here it comes.
Hi, my name is Dr. Kevin Seymour. I'm assistant curator at Fossil Mammals here at the Royal Ontario Museum. And I'm standing in front of our giant ground sloth Erematherium to tell you a few things about it today. One of the interesting things about the giant ground sloth is even though it's very large and it looks fearsome, we can tell by the structure of its teeth that it was a plant-eating mammal. We actually have some preserved poop of it and some of its relatives. This piece of poop in the case here has dried plant material in it. And so we can see that that's the food it was eating. So it's not actually a carnivore or meat-eating animal, even though it looks fierce. It's just a plant eater.
Now, we know about sloths, right? I don't know how they behave. I know today's current sloths do this. They're very slow. Could that sloth be slow? We don't know. There's a lot of things we don't know, and I'm glad to tell you that we don't know, okay? So the things that we've seen here on Earth today seem to be a lot different than they were in the past. So you have this little sloth here, 4 feet, whatever they grow. They can grow up to 18 foot. Some of them grow up to 10 feet, so on. Now, this next creature is called a giant armadillo, or sometimes it's called a glyptodon. Why? Because it's very big. This giant armadillo was quite unlike any other animal to roam the planet. Growing the size of a small car, they covered in penetrable armor up to 5 centimeters thick. This thick. And so they would have that thick, and you could see them. We find them in the Peace River. We find this little outside of his shell. See, we find these pieces all over the place in the river when we come fossil hunting. It's really neat. Its height 5 feet, its length 11 feet, and weight about 2 tons. It's just estimates. Okay, the next one this is a recent one. When I was researching this out in 2020, in February, they reported in Argentina that they found these 4 calyptodons, giant armadillos. And you could see the stone, you see them right here, perfectly good shape, right in the mud. A farmer found these remains right in his land. And you can see them 1, 2, 3, 4. And you can see the scoots right penetrate. You can see it right there. You get the idea how big and massive they were. So imagine seeing an armadillo in your backyard this big, and you had to deal with it. This is the Ice Age. I mean, these are big creatures, and they had lots of grass. That's why I believe they had a lot of grass. This is part of the shell. And you can see right here, you see this little shell. That's what we find when we go fossil hunting. So we tell everybody, be careful now, you can find this fossil. And we find a lot of these armadillo scoots. They're the outside of the shell. Richard Owen named this in 1839. It's one of the earliest ones that were found. The armor is made of thick scale. I said it's 5 centimeters, that's about 2 inches thick. And so these are things we find. And then the glyptodon, because its scoots or the scales are put in different, they kind of, you're talking about design. God's unbelievable. He's got all these weird designs that come all around the plate, and you could see them. And so when we dig them, we have to be very careful. Now, you know about this, everybody knows about Smilodon, right? The big saber-toothed cat, 4 to 5 feet, large, robust cat, weighing over 600 pounds, 2 large canine teeth, very large. That's what it's named for. And to this day, nobody really knows about those canine teeth. They believed it was good for killing. We know that our dogs, one behind me, barking, and there's dogs all around us, cats, they have these large fangs and outside teeth. And those fangs are, they believe in this animal was to kill prey. When a dog tries to chew a piece of meat, you'll see it move over to the side because that's where it needs to chew. And you'll see an animal move to its molars because of the canines getting in the way. So they're really known for that. Of course, they were meat eaters. They preyed on things. And La Brea pits, very famous, La Brea tar pits are famous in California for the Smilodon. And they have found 3,000 Smilodons in that area. I do envy them there. We find a lot of mammoths. We found basically 4 mammoths in the Peace River. They are finding lots of smilodons. They believe because there were lots of mammoths around. This is a smilodon. We have this in our museum. This is, we've actually found the lower part of the jaw. We found some of the top teeth. We never found these things. These things will tend to break. Now, a saber-toothed cat can open its mouth up, not like we do, not like a cat. Cat can open it up pretty big. But a saber-toothed tiger, if you take the skull and stretch it out, you can go up to 105 degrees. So that had a great big mouth that literally could do some damage. And I found this interesting. The saber-toothed cat, they like to judge it by, this was the oldest and this was the youngest. Smilodonus, populata, fatalis, and gracilis. The gracilis is a smaller one. In Florida, they thought they always had the smaller one, but now we're finding parts like this that go into this guy. The one that I have in our museum, it's a model. It's not actual. I wish it was a real skull, but you can see it was found in 1842. The name means scalpel or two-edged knife because of the mouth, the 2 teeth. How about a giant beaver? Okay, about 8.2 feet. We found parts of that. So we know giantism was in the fossil record. Weighed about 440 pounds. How about a cave bear? Okay, many caves in Central Europe had skeletons, cave bears inside. The height would be 11.5 feet tall. Weighed while standing up, in other words, it stood up, it would be that tall. Its stout body had long thighs, massive shins, in-turning feet, and they make this conclusion, and I would go along with it, that it looks like maybe a brown bear. And why not? I believe the bears are all one kind, part of a family. What would they look like if they existed today? There you go. That's why I didn't want to live during the Ice Age. You meet a bear out there, and that's kind of bear will eat you up. Here's how the lost sharks. Now, everybody knows about sharks, and they talk about megalodons. Well, this is a megalodon. This is a true megalodon. And we believe that we found a lot of shark teeth, always shark teeth in the area. We find dugong ribs. What are dugong ribs? They're like manatees, but extinct, and we find them all over the area. So with these mirage of fossils, we're not also finding mammals, but we're finding marine fossils. So we believe the ocean was there in the beginning, and then the mammals came later. Now, you can see the teeth we found. I have one that I hang around my neck. I found one about 3 inches. Another one is about this big. It's 4 or 5 inches. We had to buy that one, but that was found in the Peace River. So people spend days, years trying to find these big things, keep digging them up. For every inch, you have about 10 feet. So this is 5 inches. The shark would measure 50 feet. These were giant, giant animals. They have 250 teeth, up to 6.6 inches. Their mouths could measure 6 to 7 feet. And they're large. We believe that they were the largest sea predator of all things. We're not talking about whales. So this is the University of Miami. University of Florida, the Florida Museum of Natural History, where I took this picture. You see how big the shark is? I'm going to go a little closer. You see the teeth, how they line up? Now imagine finding these big shark teeth. You'll put them up, 1, 2, and they have layers of them. 5, 6, they go right back with layers of them. That's why we find these shark teeth all the time. So this big shark had a great big mouth, 6 by 7 feet. And you could see by putting the shark's teeth in, you can kind of get an idea how big the mouth is. The technical name is Carcharodon. And this one is Agostidens, which is from the Cooper River, South Carolina. So we have found big shark's teeth. We have never found enough to put together to make a jaw where we dig fossils, but we know that those megalodons did exist at one time with these ice age creatures that we had. We believe that all these creatures might have existed when of course they exist because they were put on the ark. So when they let go of the ark, a lot of these creatures start to migrate, move throughout the world, And as they started to move out the world, they were breeding. And that's where we get all these extinct creatures. Now, I said a big mouth, didn't I? Well, take a look at this guy right here. You can bring your whole family in. I've seen this before. And so you get an idea of what's going on. As I come to the last slide, I had to share with you. This is from Yukok Plateau, grasslands located in southwest Siberia. And I couldn't help but think that we had, not like this, not grass like that, but almost similar, but we had these undulating plains in Florida with these savannas, and a lot of these animals that were getting cold migrated down. And so you could think of thousands and thousands of animals, if you can imagine this, all over this grass eating, because we find so many fossils, we can tell you that there was a lot of animals here. We had the zoo here. We had the rhinoceroses, we had the bisons, we had everything you could think of right here migrating to Florida, and very unique by its size. Now, I hope you enjoyed this. I went kind of quickly. I usually take a little more time to explain everything, but this is time to give you an idea about these creatures, how they're amazing by themselves. They kind of give you an inclination, and like some of the animals might have been before. I don't know, because remember, those animals are carried in the ark. Also, it gives you an idea when I talked about ice age, that the ice age had to be caused by what? A catastrophe, a worldwide flood. So that will also help you with this global warming thing going on in your mind. Remember, God doesn't create junk. And what we see is that his creation is mighty. As Job says, Lord, I've heard you with my ears, but now I see you with my eyes. And so that's what we want you to do. We want you to be able to see God with your eyes. And this is the whole idea of the venture. That's why we now at the museum have 4 fantastic parts, remnants of a giant, of a herd of Columbian mammoths that roamed the earth at one time. And we'd love to show them to you. We also have lots of other fossils that we collected over the years that represent an ice age. I hope this was helpful to you. And now, Johnny, I'm going to turn this over to you for any questions and answers, or answers we can provide.